Everyone. Today we're starting in on a new chapter and a new system. So we're starting chapter 23, the digestive system. And I actually really like this cartoon. I think it's simplistic, but it really does get the point across about what the different processes for digestion are and what the different functions of the digestive organs are. If you find yourself bored while you're in isolation, go look at the awkwardyeti.com if you haven't. They have a bunch of anatomy-based cartoons that you might find amusing. Okay, so let's start in on the digestive system. In general, the function of your digestive system is to take in food, break it down into molecules that can be absorbed into the bloodstream, and then to get rid of undigestible leftovers. Processing the food we eat involves 6 essential activities that are described here in this figure. They include, in blue, ingestion, or starting off food processing by actually putting food into the digestive system, and this is done by taking food into your mouth. Once you've ingested food, you need to then mechanically break down the food that you eat. Mechanical breakdown is an activity that occurs in very different areas of the digestive tract. It's going to be where you see those blue arrows. So mechanical digestion, they didn't give you a blue arrow, but it is occurring in the mouth as well as you chew your food. But then they give you the blue arrows in the stomach. The stomach is involved in mechanical breakdown of food. As your stomach churns and contracts, it is going to help to mechanically break down food. And then if you look, you also have blue arrows in the small intestine. So you have mechanical breakdown occurring in the small intestine as well. The small intestines will contract and cause something called segmentation. The function of all of this mechanical breakdown, regardless of where it's occurring, is to break down food and then also increase the surface area of the ingested food so that it is ready to be chemically digested by enzymes. Another step is going to be that you need a way to propel your food throughout the digestive tract, and so this is propulsion. Propulsion is shown to you in green on this figure. It's going to be all of the movement of food through your digestive tract. It starts when you swallow your food, and then you have the food moving through the digestive tract via peristalsis, or waves of contraction and relaxation. We finally then get to chemical digestion. So digestion is being shown to you in purple, and when they mean digestion, they're really talking about chemical digestion or digestion via enzymes. So digestion involves the secretion of enzymes into specific portions of the digestive tract so that complex food molecules are broken down into smaller molecules that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. And that's our next step. So kind of in the orangey color, they're showing you absorption. And absorption is going to involve absorbing nutrients from the gastrointestinal tract to your bloodstream, but it's also going to be involving absorbing water, vitamins, and minerals. If you look at the small intestine portion on this figure, you can see that a lot of absorption is occurring at the end of the small intestine, but it's also occurring in the large intestine. What we'll see when we kind of get into the functions of the different organs is that different substances will be absorbed in the small intestine versus the large intestine. You absorb nutrients from your small intestine. The absorption that is occurring in your large intestine is primarily water. And then the last step is humorously shown in brown on the slide. It is defecation, and this is how undigestible leftovers will be removed from the body. And so if you go back to the little cartoon, you can see that all of the 6 essential activities are being shown to you. You have ingestion occurring, you have mechanical breakdown occurring. It's occurring in a couple of different places. You can't see it in the small intestines because they're showing them just as pipes. You have propulsion, so the food would be propelled through all of the digestive system. And then digestion is a little bit difficult to see because, again, it would be in some of the small intestine. Absorption, and then lastly, defecation. We're going to walk through the organs of the digestive system, and the first thing that you need to know about the digestive anatomy is that the digestive system can be broken down into two groupings of organs. There are going to be some organs that are part of the alimentary canal, and then other organs are going to be considered accessory digestive organs. The organs of the alimentary canal are probably what you think of when you're thinking of the digestive system. They are the organs of your gastrointestinal tract. And so your alimentary canal is going to be a single tube that has modifications depending on what region you're looking at, but it starts at the mouth and it ends at the anus. It is going to have specialized regions that do specific functions. It includes your oral cavity or your mouth, the stomach, the small and large intestines, as well as the anus. So your alimentary canal is going to include mouth, or the oral cavity, the esophagus, your stomach, which is over here, small intestines, and large intestine. It'll also include the anus. For the alimentary canal is going to be involved in all of the digestive processes that we talked about on the previous slides. It will be involved in ingestion, propulsion, mechanical breakdown, absorption, and defecation. The other grouping of digestive organs are the accessory digestive organs. These are organs that play some role in the digestive processes we discussed, but they are not part of the single tube, alimentary canal, or digestive tract. Accessory digestive organs include your teeth, your tongue, gallbladder, and then digestive glands like salivary glands and your liver. Seems funny to think of your liver as a gland, but it is, and it's the largest gland in your body. And then another accessory digestive organ would be your pancreas. You want to be able to make sure that you can identify all of the different components of the digestive system on a figure similar to this one shown here, but you also want to make sure that you can recognize whether that specific organ is going to be a part of the alimentary canal or whether it is considered an accessory digestive organ. What we're going to do now is we're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to work through the components of the alimentary canal as well as some of those accessory digestive organs. So I said that your alimentary canal is a single tube that starts at the mouth and ends at the anus. There is going to be a common or basic setup of the alimentary canal regardless of what region you're looking at. This is going to be a basic plan, and the basic plan is going to be that your alimentary canal and all of the organs will have 4 basic layers or tunics. There are going to be changes or specializations at different regions or organs, but overall the organs of your alimentary canal will have these 4 layers in common. You need to know these basic layers and be able to identify them, know what is found in each of the layers. But then when we get to the organs, you also need to be aware of specializations or differences specific organs have away from this basic plan and why that change is important. The change is usually going to be reflecting some specialized function of that organ. But let's look at what the basic plan is. So this figure here is showing you the 4 basic layers of the alimentary canal. And we're going to start looking at these layers from most internal and working our way out externally. So the most internal layer is going to be the mucosa. This is going to be close to the lumen or the open space of the organ. So your mucosa is going to be here. The lumen is right here, so that's the opening of the central opening of the alimentary canal. And so you have the most internal portion is going to be your mucosa, shown here in red. You have the next layer is going to be the submucosa, and the submucosa I'm circling in blue. It's going to be this region kind of in tan right here. And then external to that, you are going to have your muscular layer called the muscularis externa. The muscularis externa does actually have two layers of muscles, so both muscle layers here, kind of in the orangey red color, is going to be your muscularis externa. And then the most external layer that is going to be marked in green is your serosa. So the serosa is going to be the most external layer. So we're going to look at these layers in more detail. So we're going to start with the most internal layer, the mucosa. So the mucosa is going to be closest to the lumen or the central opening of the alimentary canal. It's this region that I'm marking in red right here. The mucosa itself has three sublayers, and again, I'm going to give these to you from most internal to most external. So the most internal layer of your mucosa is the epithelium, which is going to be this kind of light pink layer here. You then have an intermediate lamina propria, which is going to be this kind of beigey area right here. And then you have the most external portion of your mucosa, this kind of orangey red layer right here. That is your muscularis mucosae. If we go back and look at the mucosa as a whole, the function of the mucosa is to secrete protective mucus, digestive enzymes, and hormones. It is also involved in absorbing end products of digestion and then protecting us against infectious diseases. The most internal sublayer of the mucosa, the epithelium, is shown to you in kind of this light pink layer right here. The epithelium is composed of simple columnar epithelial tissue that has, in most regions, mucus-secreting cells. So the epithelium is able to produce mucus to line the alimentary tract, and this can help to protect the organ itself from digestive enzymes digesting it, and it can also help food as it passes through the tract. In certain areas, the epithelium may also secrete enzymes or specific hormones. The next sublayer of the mucosa is the lamina propria. The lamina propria is going to be kind of this tannish colored layer that's between the epithelium and then your muscularis mucosae. It is composed of loose areolar connective tissue, and running through the lamina propria are going to be capillaries that are going to play a role in absorption and lymphoid follicles that will help protect us against infections. The most external sublayer of the mucosa is going to be our muscularis mucosae, and this is shown in kind of the orangey red layer that you see right here. The muscularis mucosae is smooth muscle that will contract to produce localized movements of the mucosa. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next layer of the alimentary canal, which is the submucosa. The submucosa is going to be just external to the mucosa, and so it's going to be this area that is shown in tan here. So you have the submucosa here. It is again composed of loose areolar connective tissue, and you can see all of these little blue, red, and green structures running through your submucosa are going to be blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. And then the yellow structures will also be nerves. And then external to the submucosa is our next layer, the muscularis externa. The muscularis externa is shown here. It is going to be two layers of distinct muscle. There's going to be an inner layer right here that the fibers are going to be arranged in a circular fashion. And so these are the circular layer of your muscularis externa. And then you have another layer that's more externally placed where the fibers are going to be arranged longitudinally. So then this is going to be your longitudinal layer of your muscularis externa. These muscles are responsible for segmentation, which is going to occur when non-adjacent segments of the alimentary tract organs alternatively contract and relax. And this is basically going to kind of push food back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, without really propelling it through the digestive tract. The purpose of segmentation is basically to mix food and to slow propulsion through the tract. The muscles of the muscularis externa are also going to be involved in peristalsis. Peristalsis is going to be when adjacent segments of the alimentary tract contracts, and then this is going to propel or push food quickly through the digestive tract. If you look at your inner circular layer of your muscularis externa, there can be areas where the inner circular layer will be thickened, and when this occurs, it's going to form a sphincter, or basically a valve, to prevent movement of a substance from one area to another if that sphincter is contracted. And then finally, our last and most external layer is going to be the serosa. This is the visceral peritoneum, or the portion of the serous membrane around the alimentary canal organs. The serosa is formed by areolar connective tissue that is covered with mesothelium. An exception to this is going to be when we look at the esophagus. The esophagus, you are going to have the serosa formed from a fibrous adventia, and this helps to strengthen the esophagus for the passage of food on its way to the stomach. The alimentary canal begins with the mouth and the oral cavity. The mouth and the oral cavity will be involved in the majority of digestive processes we've spoken about. It's where ingestion occurs. It is also going to be involved in mechanical digestion through chewing. It begins propulsion when you swallow, and there actually is some chemical digestion that occurs in the oral cavity through enzymes like salivary amylase and lingual lipase. Absorption really is not going to be occurring in the mouth. There's no absorption of nutrients, vitamins, or water. The only absorption that would occur in the oral cavity would be a few drugs. Now we're going to look closer at the components of both the alimentary canal and then accessory digestive organs. We're going to start at the beginning and work our way through the digestive system to the end. So the first region we have to talk about is the mouth and the oral cavity. Here you're looking at a sagittal section through the head and the neck, and you can see the oral cavity and then the posteriorly placed pharynx. So you have your oral cavity here, and then if you remember back from respiratory, you have your pharynx back here. Running out of room, sorry. The nasal cavity that we talked about in the respiratory system is going to be superiorly placed, and it's not very visible in this figure. If we look at the oral cavity, you have the oral cavity formed laterally by the cheeks and anteriorly by the lips. Superiorly, the roof of your oral cavity is going to be formed by your hard and soft palates, and then kind of filling the space at the floor of your oral cavity will be your tongue. Lining the oral cavity is stratified squamous epithelial tissue, which is durable but can also be replaced rather quickly if you burn it with hot coffee or pizza. Everyone probably has the experience of burning the roof of their mouth when you eat a piece of pizza too quickly and don't let it cool down. It hurts for a day, but then because you have epithelial tissue lining your oral cavity, it can heal rather quickly. So I had said that the roof of the oral cavity is formed by the hard and soft palates. The hard palate is going to be formed anteriorly by the left and the right maxillary bones, and so we can see that you have your maxilla here, and then posteriorly you would have your left and right palatine bones forming the last portion of your hard palate. If you touch the roof of your mouth with the tip of your tongue, you can feel these ridges or corrugations on the roof of your mouth. This is going to be your hard palate, and these ridges actually create friction against your tongue and help with manipulation of food in your oral cavity. Posterior to your hard palate is your soft palate, and this is primarily formed of skeletal muscles. So you have your soft palate here. And when you swallow, the soft palate is going to kind of lift up to then close off the nasopharynx to prevent food or drink from entering into your nasal cavity. And then hanging off of your soft palate and kind of extending down into what you think of as your throat region is going to be your uvula, or the little hangy ball at the back of your throat. The tongue is composed of intrinsic skeletal muscles with fibers that do not actually attach to bone, and the fibers of the intrinsic skeletal muscles run in all directions. This is why you can change the shape of your tongue while not changing the position of the tongue. There are also going to be extrinsic skeletal muscles that attach to the bones of the neck or even the lower jaw. And these extrinsic muscles are going to be what allow you to move your tongue. So you can protrude your tongue, retract, move it to the left or the right because of the extrinsic muscles of the tongue. You talked about these extrinsic muscles of the tongue. They're your genioglossus, your other muscles that you talked about in A&P 1. But collectively, the actions of the muscles of the tongue allow you to position and reposition food in your mouth to allow for chewing and mixing of food with saliva to form a bolus of food. A bolus of food is just a blob of food that is formed after you chew it and have it mix with saliva. And then if you remember back when we were talking about sensory receptors, there are taste buds on your tongue, so they do play a role in taste. And then the tongue is also going to help to initiate swallowing. And then even though the tongue is going to be involved in speech, which is not part of your digestive system, it is important to remember that the tongue has other functions besides just helping with the digestive process. Lastly, the tongue is attached to the floor of the mouth through a lingual frenulum, and a child can be born with a short frenulum and be considered tongue-tied. If this occurs, the frenulum can be surgically snipped so that the child doesn't have any problems with speaking or eating. Some accessory digestive organs that we need to take a closer look at are going to be your salivary glands. Salivary glands are going to be located outside of the oral cavity, but then you will have ducts carrying the saliva that these glands produce and dumping it into the oral cavity. Saliva is actually important. It actually cleans the mouth. It dissolves food chemicals to help trigger our sense of taste, and then it moistens foods that we eat so that we can chew it and mix it and form a bolus of food that will be propelled through the digestive tract. And then lastly, saliva contains enzymes that actually start to break down starches. Most of the saliva we produce are going to be produced by extrinsic salivary glands, and these are going to be the ones that we look at. You have some intrinsic salivary glands. These would be glands located within the oral cavity, but they do not form the sheer majority of the saliva that the extrinsic salivary glands do. So extrinsic salivary glands are going to lie outside of the oral cavity and then deliver the saliva to the mouth via ducts. To me, whenever I see a gland, it looks kind of like chewed up bubblegum or maybe a soggy chicken tender. So that's what you're seeing here. All of these structures that kind of look like a blob of chewing gum are going to be our extrinsic salivary glands that we need to look at closely. So you have three rather large extrinsic salivary glands. The parotid gland, which is going to be here, your submandibular gland, which is here, and then your sublingual gland, which is here. The largest salivary gland in the body is your parotid gland. It's huge. It is going to be located anterior to the ear and external to your masseter muscle, one of your big muscles of mastication. And then it extends down towards the bottom of your mandible. So all of this is going to be your parotid gland. The parotid gland is going to have a large duct that you see in green here, kind of runs across the cheek region to then dump saliva into the oral cavity about the level of your second upper molar. If you've ever heard of the mumps, you know that a person shows kind of a characteristic symptom of having big kind of chipmunk cheeks. And this is because when you suffer from the mumps, it's a viral infection that causes inflammation of the parotid gland. So kind of the chipmunk cheeks of someone with the mumps is caused by these very swollen and enlarged parotid glands. They can become so enlarged that it's difficult for someone to open their mouth because of their placement near those mastication muscles. The mumps virus is spread through saliva. So last year there were mumps outbreaks on a couple of different campuses in Philadelphia, and it's sad to think that we have a worse problem with viral infections now than last year with the mumps. The next extrinsic salivary gland is your submandibular gland. So the submandibular gland is going to be kind of below and then also extending medial to your mandible, so the name kind of makes sense. This is a big gland as well. It's not as large as the parotid gland, but it is about the size of a walnut. You can palpate kind of under your mandible posteriorly, and you should feel a somewhat rounded, movable structure. That's your submandibular gland. The gland also has a duct that opens up into the oral cavity, but in this case, the duct is going to open up near that lingual frenulum that kind of tethers the tongue to the floor of the oral cavity. And then our last salivary gland, extrinsic salivary gland we need to worry about is going to be your sublingual gland. So the sublingual gland is going to be anterior to your submandibular gland, and then like the name is telling you, it's going to be under your tongue. So there is your sublingual gland here. It has a bunch of teeny tiny ducts that open up into the floor of the oral cavity just below the tongue. And so if you can kind of think of that rush of saliva you get before getting sick, that's kind of giving you a good idea of where your sublingual glands are going to have ducts opening up. So it's going to be under the tongue on the left and the right side. Moving on to teeth. Teeth are involved in the mechanical breakdown of food through mastication or chewing. There's a difference in the number of teeth you have as an adult compared to when you were a child. When you were a child, you had a total of 20 deciduous teeth or baby teeth. These teeth erupted between the ages of 6 months and 24 months of age, but when you were about in kindergarten until about 12 years old, you lost these baby teeth when underlying permanent teeth developed and enlarged and caused the roots of your deciduous teeth to be reabsorbed. Baby teeth fall out, deciduous teeth fall out, and a way to remember that is trees that lose their leaves are considered deciduous trees. So your deciduous teeth are the ones that you lose. And when you lose your baby teeth, they are replaced with permanent teeth, and you have 32 permanent teeth. All but one set of these permanent teeth develop by the end of adolescence. The last permanent teeth, your 4 wisdom teeth or your third molars, will develop between the ages of 17 to 25, or if you're lucky, not at all. Teeth can be classified into different types based on the shape and their function. This figure is showing you the lower jaw, and it's showing you them for your deciduous teeth, so your baby teeth here, and then your permanent adult dentition down below. For the deciduous teeth versus your permanent teeth, one of the first things that you're going to notice is the number of each differ. So you only have 20 deciduous teeth and 32 permanent teeth, but you do have the same types of teeth, even though the numbers are going to differ between the adult and the child dentition. For the different types of teeth, you have incisors. The good kind of visual would be your upper front 2 teeth. On the top and the bottom would be your incisors. They are going to be chisel shaped and they are good for cutting. So think about when you're biting into an apple, it's going to be the incisors that are going to kind of cut the apple. You then have canine teeth, and canine teeth are going to be the fang-like teeth that can pierce or tear. And then you have premolars. Premolars are also called bicuspids. They have broad crowns and rounded cusps, and they can crush and grind food. And then you have your large molars that have even broader crowns and rounded cusps, and these are going to be the best teeth at grinding your food. Once you ingest food, mechanically break it down and mix it with saliva to form a bolus. You swallow food, and this is going to start propulsion. When you swallow, food will move from the mouth to the posteriorly placed oropharynx that we spoke about when we were going over the pharynx and the respiratory system. So when you swallow, food moves from the oral cavity into your oropharynx. Remember, the oropharynx can transport air from the nasal cavity or your oral cavity, or food or drink. From the oropharynx, food will move down into the laryngopharynx, which would be here. And then from the laryngopharynx, when you swallow, the larynx moves kind of anteriorly, and the epiglottis should then cover the opening to the larynx. This should then ensure that food and drink will move from the laryngopharynx into the esophagus, which it is continuous with. So here is your esophagus. And it should not continue down into the larynx. So you do not want food or drink to enter into the larynx, and hopefully your epiglottis is going to prevent that from happening. So from your laryngopharynx, food should move into your esophagus, and the esophagus is the next portion of the alimentary canal. It is a flat tube. It is going to be smooth muscle, so it is pretty flat. It's not going to be nice and round. It is formed of smooth muscle that starts at the end of your laryngopharynx and then stops at the stomach. This means that the esophagus is going to run through the thorax, and when it does so, it is going to run posterior to your trachea, which you have here, and it runs posterior to the heart as well. It runs through the thorax, but then it continues into the abdominal cavity, so it needs to pass through the respiratory diaphragm, and it does so by going through an opening called the esophageal hiatus. So the esophageal hiatus is the opening in the respiratory diaphragm that your esophagus passes through to enter into the abdominal cavity. Some people can suffer from a hiatal hernia, and what a hiatal hernia is that the end of the esophagus that should be in the abdomen, and then sometimes even the stomach, can actually go through your esophageal hiatus to then enter into the thorax. The opening between the stomach and the esophagus is going to be your cardial orifice, and surrounding this orifice is going to be a gastroesophageal or cardiac sphincter. Cardiac sphincter is a thickened area of the circular layer of your muscularis externa, and when your cardiac sphincter contracts, it closes off the opening between your esophagus and your stomach. When it's relaxed, it is open and will allow food to move from your esophagus into the stomach. I like the term cardiac sphincter because it reminds me of heartburn, and so I think of the backwash of stomach acid from your stomach to the esophagus that causes heartburn, and that helps me to remember cardiac or sphincter. And then the last thing to know about your esophagus is there are glands in the esophagus in the submucosal layer that will secrete mucus. This mucus will allow for that bolus of food, that blob of food, to move through the esophagus with less friction. The next portion of the alimentary canal is the stomach. The stomach is just an inflated portion of your alimentary canal with some specializations. It's located in your upper left quadrant, so if you think of drawing a T on your abdomen, your stomach would be located in the upper left portion, tucked under your ribs. The function of your stomach is to temporarily store food that will be digested. It's also involved in the mechanical breakdown of food into smaller components that can mix with enzymes, and the chemical digestion of the bolus of food to a liquidized form called chyme. For the gross anatomy of the stomach, there are three main portions of the stomach. There is a cardial portion that will be near your cardiac orifice, which is shown here. You also are going to have the fundus, or this domed portion of your stomach. Anytime that you hear the name fundus in anatomy, it really means a rounded upper portion, and so it's usually talking about a rounded upper portion of an organ. You then have a body, which is going to be kind of this centralized portion here, and then a pylorus, which would be here. The pyloric portion of the stomach deserves a little bit more attention. So this is the pyloric part right here, and it can be broken down into distinct regions. So there is going to be a superior portion that is going to be your antrum, and the antrum is going to be closest to your body. So you have your antrum here. You then, if you kind of work away from the antrum, you are going to move into a more narrow pyloric canal. And then you would have your pylorus here, and the pylorus is going to be continuous with your duodenum, which is here. And surrounding the pylorus will be a pyloric valve, which again, remember, whenever you have a valve or a sphincter, it is going to be that this valve is going to control how much fluid moves from your stomach into your duodenum and when you're going to have that fluid move from your stomach into your duodenum. When the muscle contracts, the pyloric valve will shut and prevent chyme from moving from the stomach into the duodenum. When it is relaxed, it will allow chyme to spurt from the stomach into the first part of your small intestine, the duodenum. There are some other anatomical features of the stomach, and these include curvatures. There's going to be a greater curvature of the stomach that is going to be kind of this curved margin along the lateral surface of your stomach. This is a pretty large curvature, especially when you compare it to the much smaller, lesser curvature that's going to be found on the medial surface of the stomach. Your stomach isn't going to be free floating in your abdomen. It is tethered to your liver, actually, by a mesentery called the lesser omentum. You can't see the lesser omentum on this figure, but the lesser omentum would be running from the lesser curvature of your stomach over to the underside of the liver. You also have a greater omentum. This greater omentum is associated with the greater curvature of the stomach. The greater omentum does not tether the stomach to any organ. Instead, it is going to be this big, like apron-like flap of fat that is going to lay over your small and your large intestines. It is going to be made up of fat deposits and contain lymph nodes, and we'll talk about the function of your greater omentum shortly. So here you're looking at a photograph of a stomach in the cadaver. It is located in the upper left quadrant, and if you look at the stomach, you can see here is the fundus, so the domed portion. Here is going to be the esophagus, so then you would have your cardial portion of the stomach here, the body of the stomach here, and then you would have your pyloric portion down here. You do have your lesser curvature shown here, and then your greater curvature here. And though most of the liver has been cut, this is going to be your liver. It would extend kind of like this, and you would have your lesser omentum extending from this lesser curvature, going to the underside of your liver to then tether your stomach in place. And on this figure, you can finally see your lesser omentum. So the lesser omentum is going to be this yellow structure running from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the underside of the liver. And the liver has been lifted here so that you can see the lesser omentum in its full extent. You can see some remains of your greater omentum here. It would have been on the greater curvature of the stomach, but it has been cut, so you're only seeing a portion of the greater omentum where it would have been attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. But on this figure, you can see your greater omentum. All of this yellow that you see here is going to be your greater omentum. So it is almost like this big apron of fat that is going to be attached to the greater curvature of the stomach, which is right here. And then it lays like an apron over your small and large intestines. Here you're seeing your liver in its full glory. And you can see that the liver is covering over some of the stomach. So you can see some of the margin of the stomach here, but not the entire extent of your stomach. For the greater omentum, it really is kind of gross looking. It is bright yellow when you open up the cadaver, and it is going to be made of fatty deposits, but it actually plays a pretty important role. So your greater omentum is laying over your large intestine and your small intestines. And if everything is functioning with your large and small intestines, there should be peristalsis occurring, or contraction of your intestines. So the greater omentum kind of rides the waves of your contracting intestines. If, let's say, you have a blockage and then things can't be passing through because there's no peristalsis, this could then be a risk of that portion of the bowel bursting. And if there's no peristalsis, the greater omentum drops down and then covers that diseased portion of the bowel, so that if there is a rupture of that bowel, you don't have fecal matter kind of spreading throughout the abdomen. It might be contained by the greater omentum that dropped down and covered that diseased portion of the bowel. So for this reason, your greater omentum is referred to as the policeman of the abdomen. And so it plays a really important role, but it is kind of one of the grossest things that we see in the cadaver in lab. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you are reviewing the anatomy of the stomach, that you can identify the features of the stomach, the different regions, the valve, the curvatures, and then the other components of the alimentary canal that it's connected to, the esophagus, and then the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum. But we're not done with the stomach yet. So we've done gross anatomy, but now we have to go back and look at some microscopic anatomy. So remember that the stomach is part of the alimentary canal. It has all of the four tunics that we talked about when we were talking about the basic setup of the alimentary canal. But remember I said that there are going to be regions that have specializations and that it might be different than the basic plan. The stomach is going to be an area that you do have a specialization. And so when you look at the stomach, you are going to see that when you look at the muscularis externa, there's an extra layer of muscle. So you have your typical longitudinal layer and your circular layer that you see here and here. But when you're looking at your muscularis externa in the stomach, there's going to be a third layer. This is going to be the one that's most internal. This is an oblique layer. The oblique layer is going to allow the stomach to contract and churn to mix food to ensure that food is mechanically broken down. If you go back and look at the figure that we just kind of looked at going over gross anatomy of the stomach, you'll see that they are showing you the different layers of the muscularis externa and that there is a third layer, your oblique layer. We also need to take a closer look at the mucosa of the stomach. So if we look at the epithelial lining, the mucosa of the stomach, it is going to be formed from simple columnar epithelial tissue. And that's what they're showing you with these little kind of light pink cells. It's simple columnar epithelial tissue. The simple columnar epithelial tissue is going to be completely composed of mucus cells. And these cells are going to secrete a double layer of an alkaline mucus that coats the inner surface of the stomach. And the fact that this is an alkaline mucus is super important. We're going to see that your stomach produces a very strong stomach acids and gastric juices. And so this alkaline mucus can help protect the stomach from digesting itself. The mucosa also is going to have these pits. throughout the stomach, and so these are called gastric pits. And so the gastric pits are going to be openings that then lead down into a gastric gland. So the gastric pit is going to be the portion where you have the simple columnar epithelial tissue lining it, and then as it dives down deeper, you transition from a gastric pit to a gastric gland. Gastric glands are going to be what produce your gastric juices. And if we dive down into the gastric glands and we look at the cells, we see that we are dealing with different cells in gastric glands versus the gastric pits. So the gastric glands will have 4 different types of cells. The dark pink cells that you see here are going to be mucous neck cells. And then we have shown in blue parietal cells, and then in purple you have chief cells, and then in green enteroendocrine cells. So there are different cells in the gastric pit and different cells in the gastric gland. For your mucous neck cells, the cells that are going to be kind of in the darker pink, you are going to have mucous neck cells secreting a thin acidic mucus, and we don't really know what the function of this very thin acidic mucus is. So neck cells produce this acidic mucus, but we don't know what the function is. Right now we're looking at a zoomed in region of a gastric gland. We can see the parietal cells that are shown in blue, the chief cells that are shown in purple, and then enteroendocrine cells that are shown in green. We're really only going to be concerned with your chief cells and your parietal cells because those are going to be the cells responsible for producing secretions that will form gastric juices. There's a difference in how much gastric juices are going to be produced by the gastric glands depending on their placement in the stomach. Gastric glands in the fundus and the body of the stomach are going to produce the most gastric juices than the regions in the glands in your pylorus. But if we go back to look at the cells, if we look at your parietal glands, the blue cells, the parietal glands are going to be producing hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is a strong acid with a pH of about 1.5 to 3.5, and it is going to be able to denature or unwind proteins, break down cell walls of plants, kill bacteria, and then importantly, it is going to activate a substance called pepsin. These cells are also going to be responsible for producing intrinsic factor, which is going to be necessary to absorb vitamin B12 in your small intestine. If we look at your chief cells, these are going to be the purple cells on this figure. Chief cells are going to secrete an inactive enzyme called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is converted to pepsin, the active enzyme, when hydrochloric acid is present. So the chief cells produce an inactive enzyme that can only be activated when you have hydrochloric acid, which is produced by a different cell in the gland. Pepsinogen can also be converted to pepsin when the pepsin levels themselves increase. So you have a nice little positive feedback loop here. As pepsinogen is converted to pepsin via hydrochloric acid, the levels of pepsin increases, and the increased levels of pepsin will then lead to more pepsinogen being converted to pepsin, which leads to more pepsinogen being converted, and so on and so on. So you do have a really nice positive feedback mechanism for the conversion of pepsinogen to your active pepsin. Chief cells are also going to secrete another enzyme called lipase that is going to be responsible for digesting about 15% of the lipids that we ingest. Moving on to the next portion of the alimentary canal, we have the small intestine. This is going to be the major organ of chemical digestion and absorption of nutrients. So when you think chemical digestion and absorption, think small intestine. So the name small intestine is actually a misnomer. It's not small, it's actually quite long. It is going to be about 2 to 4 meters in a living person, so when there's muscle tone, and it's even longer when that muscle tone is lost. It can be stretched out to about 6 to 7 meters long. The small in the name is referencing the diameter of your small intestine. The diameter of the small intestine is smaller than the diameter of the large intestine, and this is going to reflect the function of the small intestine. We're going to see that you want things to move slowly through your small intestine so that you can have absorption occurring. So you have a smaller diameter and then a long tube for your small intestine. For your small intestine, you can divide it into different subdivisions. So there are 3 subdivisions of your small intestine. And so the small intestine starts with your duodenum, which then leads into your jejunum, and then that leads into your ileum. The ileum is the last portion of your small intestine. It is continuous with your large intestine. If you're looking at this figure here, you would have your duodenum as this portion right here. You would have your jejunum probably here, and then you would have your ileum here. That would be continuous with your large intestine right here. The first portion of your small intestine is your duodenum. It is continuous with the pylorus of the stomach, so the stomach has been removed here, but you would have stomach in this area, and it is going to be the shortest portion of your small intestine. It's small, it's only about 25 centimeters in length. If you look at your duodenum, it is going to be C-shaped, and this is going to be very clear even if you're looking at the duodenum on a cadaver. And so if you make a C with your hand, this is a pretty good visualization of the size and the shape of your duodenum. The duodenum is going to curve around the head of the pancreas, which is going to be here. And the duodenum is going to be super important because there are going to be many ducts that deliver substances to your duodenum. So you have your bile duct, which is going to be this green tube here that is going to be draining bile from the liver or the gallbladder and then dumping the bile into the duodenum. The bile is going to act as kind of an emulsifier of fat, so it helps to kind of pre-digest fat, make it a little bit easier to digest chemically. And then you also have a main pancreatic duct, which is going to be a long duct running down the length of your pancreas. The main pancreatic duct will also empty into your duodenum, and it's going to be delivering pancreatic juices to your duodenum. And the ducts, whether it's your bile duct or your main pancreatic duct, are going to enter into the duodenum at something called the major duodenal papilla, which you can see right here. It would be that area that I'm circling. So the main pancreatic duct carries pancreatic juices to the duodenum. The bile duct is going to carry bile from the liver or the gallbladder and deliver it also to the duodenum. Your C-shaped duodenum is going to empty into the second portion of your small intestine, the jejunum. So the jejunum is about 2.5 meters long, and it is then going to be continuous with the last portion of the small intestine, the ileum. So in this figure, we have the large intestines have been cut away. You have your duodenum shown right here. So it's the C-shaped portion here. There's your duodenum. And then you have your jejunum continuing, and it is going to then lead into your ileum, which you can see right here. The ileum is going to then dump components into the large intestine, which it is continuous with. Your ileum is going to be about 3.6 meters long. And if you look kind of at the junction of the ileum and the large intestine here, which is blown up here, you have a little valve between the ileum and the first part of the large intestine. This is called the ileocecal valve. And the ileocecal valve is there to help to ensure that you don't have large intestine contents working its way back into the small intestine. Okay, so the small intestine is specialized for absorbing nutrients, and there are going to be structural modifications of the small intestine that reflect this. First, it's long. This means that substances are going to move through the small intestine, and it's going to take a long time for those substances to go through this long tube. The length is going to provide a large surface area for absorption to occur. Second, there are going to be 3 structural modifications that further increase the surface area and then opportunities for absorption. The first modification is going to be that there are circular folds throughout your small intestine. What circular folds are deep folds of the mucosa and the submucosa that forces the chyme or that kind of liquidized food to spiral through the lumen of the small intestine instead of taking a straight shot through. So here you are looking at some of your circular folds, and so chyme is going to have to kind of work its way through all of these spirals and spiral around and around and around, kind of like running through a water tube that is twisty and twirly. It's going to take longer to work through all of these circular folds as the chyme moves through your intestines. Without those circular folds, it could just take a straight shot through the lumen and it would spend less time in the small intestine. Let me just erase these because it's going to get in the way. So you had your first modification was going to be your circular folds, but there are other modifications. These are going to be villi and microvilli. If you look at your circular folds, you can kind of see that there are these little finger-like projections coming off of all surfaces of those circular folds. And so all of these little nubby projections on the circular folds lining your intestine are going to be villi. To see microvilli, we need to take a closer look at your villi themselves. So on all of the surfaces of your circular folds, you are going to have these little villi or finger-like extensions of the mucosa. The epithelial cells of the villi are going to be columnar cells that are very absorptive. So digestive food can be absorbed through these epithelial cells, and then they are going to reach the capillary bed kind of in the central portion of a villus. So you have in light pink, these are your epithelial cells. You can have nutrients absorbed through these cells, and then they enter into the main portion or the main stalk of the villus where there's a capillary bed. If you look at kind of the surface of your villus, so they've taken this box here on the surface of the villus that would be close to the lumen, and they've expanded it out and then magnified it. What you can see is that along the mucosal surface of the villi are going to be these smaller microvilli, and the microvilli are going to be densely packed. The microvilli are so closely packed together that they form a structure called a brush border. And the plasma membrane of the microvilli have brush border enzymes that will allow for digestion of carbohydrates and proteins. The next portion of the alimentary canal after the small intestine is the large intestine. The large intestine has 5 distinct regions, and they are going to be found collectively in all of the quadrants. You can kind of think of your large intestine as being a big picture frame that frames your abdominal cavity, and your other organs are going to be kind of situated within this picture frame. The large intestine starts at the cecum, which is going to be this region right here, and extending off of the cecum is going to be your appendix. The cecum and the appendix is going to be in your lower right quadrant. From your cecum and your appendix, you are going to have a portion of your large intestine running up the right side of your body, and then it is going to turn and then run horizontally across the abdominal cavity, turn again to then run down the left side of your body. So the portions that are running up Horizontal and down would be your colon, and we'll talk about the different regions of the colon shortly. You will then have your rectum that will be running straight down and into the pelvis, and then it would extend out as the anal canal. Some unique features of the large intestine that allow you to distinguish it from the small intestine are the presence of Taenia coli, or this band of longitudinal muscle from the longitudinal layer of your muscularis externa. So this kind of white band that you see running down midline of your large intestine would be that Taenia coli. The Taenia coli then help to form these distinct bulges that are haustra, or the singular haustrum. So here's a haustrum here, and then you would have another one here. So then these are examples of haustra. These are bulges caused by the tone of the Taenia coli. The other defining characteristic of your large intestine will be these epiploic appendages, or these blobs of fat that are going to hang off of the external surface of your large intestine. No one knows what they do. Everyone has them. They're very apparent. So if you see epiploic appendages, you know you're looking at the large intestine. All right, so now we're going to walk through all of the different subdivisions or regions of your large intestine. The first part of your large intestine is going to be the cecum. And so the cecum is going to be kind of this blind pouch that's going to be located in your lower right quadrant of the body. Extending off of the cecum will be an appendix. And so the appendix right here, it's called the vermiform appendix because vermes means worm. So it is this little worm-like structure that extends off of your appendix. The appendix is actually a mass of lymphoid tissue, so it does play a role in immunity, but then it also seems to play a role in being kind of a storehouse for good gut bacteria. If you've ever had to take heavy doses of antibiotics, you know that the antibiotics kill off good bacteria as well as bad bacteria, and you may have had GI issues after that. And one of the ways that your colon can recolonize if you lose your good gut bacteria is your appendix can kind of act as a storehouse of your good gut bacteria so that it can recolonize if need to. But everyone knows of the appendix because of it causing problems. You can have bacteria kind of getting caught in this appendix and multiplying, and the appendix can become enlarged, and if it bursts, it can become very life-threatening very quickly because it would be attached to your cecum that will be containing fecal matter. From your cecum, you are going to have the start of your colon. And the colon can be broken down into distinct regions. So the first portion of the colon is going to be the portion that runs up the right side of the body. So this is your ascending colon, since it is going to be ascending up the right side of the body. So the ascending colon is going to be continuous with your cecum. It runs up the right side of your body and it gets to about the level of your right kidney. At this point, it is going to curve or bend or flex, and this bend is going to be referred to as the right colic flexure, or you can also sometimes see it referred to as the hepatic flexure. So hepatic flexure because you would have your liver located on the right side of the body. Right colic flexure because it is the flexure of the colon on the right side of the body. After you have the right colic or hepatic flexure, you are then going to transition into your transverse colon that is going to run across the abdominal cavity, this horizontal portion here. And from your transverse colon, you are going to have the colon make another 90-degree turn or flexure. And so this is your left colic flexure. Sometimes you see this referred to as the splenic flexure because you would have your spleen located on the left side of the body. After you have your left colic or splenic flexure, you are going to have the colon descend down your left side of the body as your descending colon. So then you would have the descending colon here. The descending colon is going to be the portion that is kind of going straight down the left side of the body. But then you have kind of this squiggly portion, and it's even more squiggly in life. It's kind of S-shaped. That is going to then cross into the pelvis. This is going to be your sigmoid colon. So the portion of the colon on the left side of the body that is not going to be running straight down, but kind of squiggles in and then enters into the pelvis is going to be your sigmoid colon. From your sigmoid colon, you are going to have your rectum take a straight shot down into the pelvis, and so then this portion is your rectum. So you want to make sure that you can identify your different regions of the large intestine. Where's your appendix? Where's your cecum? What is the valve that separates your cecum from your ileum? And then the different regions of your colon. So the ascending colon, you should know, is going to be running up the right side of your body. You then have a curvature, that flexure, that is going to then show the transition from the right ascending colon to your transverse colon. You want to know your left colic or your splenic flexure is going to be the transition from the transverse to your descending colon. Be able to identify your descending colon from your sigmoid colon and then where your rectum is. So your sigmoid colon is going to enter into the pelvis and then join with the rectum at about the level of S3. So your rectum is going to start about the level of S3, and then it is going to lead to the anal canal. The anal canal is going to be the last portion of the large intestine, and the anal canal opens to the body exterior at the anus. On this figure, you have your rectum here, and then you would have your anal canal here, and then the anus would be here. So we've finished up with the alimentary canal, but we still have a few accessory organs to look at. So the accessory digestive organs we're looking at next are going to be the liver and the gallbladder. The liver is going to have lots of functions that are not involving the digestive system. Right now, we're going to be only looking at the functions of your liver that's involving the digestive system. And so for that reason, we're going to be talking about how the liver is a gland that is going to produce bile. Bile is going to be a fat emulsifier. Kind of think of this as a pre-treatment that will help with digestion, just like if you have a really bad stain on a piece of clothing, you'll use a pre-treat before you go and wash it to make the washing process easier. Bile is going to help to emulsify fat so that it can be broken down easier. The other accessory digestive organ we need to worry about is your gallbladder. The gallbladder is going to have one job and one job only, and that is to store bile. It is not going to be able to produce bile. It is just going to be a sac or a bag that is going to store the bile that is produced by your liver. Your liver is going to be the largest gland in your body. It is huge. A healthy liver is going to be incredibly large. It is going to be located in your right quadrant, right upper quadrant, but then it also extends into your left upper quadrant as well. It is going to be protected by your rib cage, so it kind of sits in the protection of the rib cage, even though it's abdominal, because it is going to push up on the underside of your respiratory diaphragm. You can break down your liver into 4 distinct lobes. You can see 2 of these lobes easily when you're looking at the liver in anterior view, like we're looking at it in this figure. So you have an incredibly large right lobe that would be filling up most of your right upper quadrant, and then a smaller left lobe that will extend into the left upper quadrant. You do have a ligament that is going to separate these left and right lobes from each other. This is your falciform ligament. So the falciform ligament is kind of this paper-thin sheet-like ligament that is going to separate the right and left lobes from each other, but it also is going to suspend the liver from the respiratory diaphragm that would be located superiorly and attach it to the anterior abdominal wall. So the falciform ligament separates the lobes, but also helps to tether the liver to the respiratory diaphragm and the abdominal wall. So again, we are looking at your liver in anterior view right now. So you can see two of your four lobes. You have a right lobe, you have a left lobe, and then peeking out, you can actually see your gallbladder. Usually the gallbladders are going to be kind of bright green in color from the bile. In this person, the gallbladder is pretty clear, but on the illustrations, they always show it to you as a green structure, because a lot of times it would be stained by the bile that it stores. The other feature that you can see in this view would be your falciform ligament that would be separating your left and your right lobes from each other. So here we are looking at your liver in posterior view. And when you look at the liver in posterior view, you can see all four lobes and those two lobes that we haven't talked about yet. So you have, this is going to be superior, this is inferior. You're looking at the liver in posterior view. This is going to be the right lobe, still very large, your left lobe, and then here is your gallbladder. And then we can see our last two lobes that we have to worry about. You have a caudate lobe, C-A-U-D-A-T-E. And then why I spelled it out is you have a caudate lobe, but you also have a quadrate lobe, Q-U-A-D-R-A-T-E. So you just want to mind your Q's and C's. The caudate lobe is going to be superiorly placed, and the way that I remember where the caudate lobe is it's going to be very close to the inferior vena cava. So this is going to be where the inferior vena cava was. So I think caudate, CA, and cava, CA. The quadrate lobe with a Q is going to be inferiorly placed and closer to your gallbladder. Among many things your liver does, your liver produces bile. And so we're going to concentrate on bile right now. And so the liver is going to produce bile, but then it needs a series of ducts to be able to carry bile away from the liver to be stored temporarily in the gallbladder until it's ready to be used, or delivered directly from the liver to the duodenum. And the series of ducts that carry bile is going to be referred to as your biliary tree. The biliary tree are going to be all of these tubes that are shown in green in this figure here. And so you have different components of your biliary tree. The biliary tree is going to start with hepatic ducts. You have a right hepatic duct that is going to be right here. It's the right hepatic duct draining bile from the right lobe of your liver. You also have a left hepatic duct that would be draining bile from the left lobe of the liver. So you have a left hepatic duct here. Your right and left hepatic ducts are going to merge to form this single structure right here called the common hepatic duct. From the common hepatic duct, bile can take one of two different directions. So think of it as like choose your own adventure. Bile can go straight from your common hepatic duct to then drain into your bile duct to be delivered into the duodenum. Or if it's not needed, it can be temporarily shunted to the liver via a cystic duct. It's going to be shown right here. The cystic duct is going to branch off of your common hepatic duct and carry bile to your gallbladder to be stored. When needed, the gallbladder can contract and then send bile through that cystic duct back to your bile duct to then be delivered to your duodenum. So that gallbladder is going to be a very thin-walled but muscular sac that's located on the ventral surface of the liver. You can see some of it peeking out from the ventral surface if you are looking at the liver in anterior view. The only function of the gallbladder is to store and concentrate bile. It doesn't produce bile, it's only going to store it and concentrate it. When the gallbladder contracts, it can then release bile back into the biliary tree so that it can be delivered to the duodenum. And honestly, the only thing that the gallbladder can actually make would be gallstones. So gallstones can occur if you have high cholesterol or if you have too few bile salts. And gallstones can be very painful and actually can be very dangerous as well. So if you have gallstones that are as large as the gallstones in this person, these are about the size of like a garden pea, they can cause an obstruction and you would not be able to have bile flowing from the gallbladder, and this could then cause obstructive jaundice. They can also cause quite a bit of pain. So if you look at these gallstones, you can see that they're not exactly smooth like pebbles. They can have some edges and points to them. So the gallbladder would still be contracting, but then when it would contract, it would be contracting against these sharp gallstones, and it can cause quite a bit of discomfort. How gallstones are treated: sometimes you can treat them through ultrasound vibration or lithotripsy to break them down into smaller sizes that might not cause pain. You can have them vaporized by lasers, or you can treat them with drugs, maybe treat high cholesterol so that you don't form gallstones, or you may have to have your gallbladder surgically removed. So to help you to remember that it's going to be the liver that produces bile and then the gallbladder that stores it, there is a nice little Awkward Yeti cartoon that's showing your liver making the bile, asking the gallbladder to hold it for a while, and then the only thing that a gallbladder can make would be a gallstone. There's a whole series of gallbladder comics on Awkward Yeti if you're interested. And then the last digestive accessory organ that we have to talk about is your pancreas. We talked about the pancreas when we were dealing with its endocrine functions in the endocrine system, but when we talked about the pancreas, we did mention that it's endocrine and exocrine in function. So now we're back to talk about the pancreas and its exocrine function. So your pancreas is going to be deep to your stomach. You have your duodenum here kind of curving around your pancreas, but you would have your stomach, which has been cut from here, covering your pancreas so you wouldn't be able to see it if you opened someone up for abdominal surgery without lifting up the stomach. You do have, even though the pancreas kind of looks like a blobby, soggy chicken tender, it does have distinct anatomy. There is going to be a head region where the duodenum is kind of wrapping around, and then you have a tail that would be the end of your pancreas, and the tail of the pancreas would be close to your spleen. So when we talked about the pancreas, we talked about it being endocrine and exocrine in function. We know that the pancreas is going to produce hormones. It produces your insulin and your glucagon that we talked about when we were going over the endocrine system. And now we have to worry about its exocrine function. Its exocrine function is you have cells within the pancreas that will secrete pancreatic juices or digestive enzymes. And these digestive enzymes are going to be delivered directly to the duodenum through a main pancreatic duct. The main pancreatic duct is going to run down the length of your pancreas. So it's this pink tube here that then opens into your duodenum along with your bile duct. So your pancreas is going to produce some digestive enzymes that will be delivered directly to the start of your small intestine, the duodenum.